My Lords, the Northern Ireland Protocol stands on a falsehood, on a palpable absurdity, namely the idea that checks on goods between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland will upset the political equilibrium, possibly even threaten the peace, but such checks on goods between Northern Ireland and Great Britain are just fine and dandy. And it's because we've all been dancing around that anomaly that we have this committee to meet in. All of the ripples have been caused by trying to come to terms with something that is simply absurd. I want to add my voice to all of those who have complimented our chairman. Our committee does indeed have, what was his phrase, strong and divergent views. Now, there speak 40 years nearly of diplomatic experience. That is one way of putting it. And nonetheless, we have come up with some serious proposals with consensus. But I think we were able to do so for one reason, which is worth bringing out, which is that of all the witnesses we heard from, there wasn't one who was actively pro-protocol. There was certainly a variety of views. I was very impressed, first time I've ever been on a select committee, and everything that people said about the balance and the fairness and the thoroughness is absolutely right. We heard from every different quarter of opinion. And there were those who thought it was a price worth paying and those who didn't, and there were those who put the blame on Brexit and those who put the blame on the protocol. But there was not one voice arguing that the protocol was an improvement on the status quo ante. Not one. Now, if I can broadly group the complaints that I heard under two headings from the various witnesses who appeared before us, one lot are what we might call the practical objections. These were, I think, uniform across Northern Ireland. You couldn't tell which tradition somebody was from when they voiced them. They were concerns to do with the sausages, the pet passports, and all of the other pragmatic difficulties of an overzealous implementation. And I think there would, in theory, be quite easy solutions to those if there were a modicum of goodwill. The second lot, I think it's fair to say, were objections voiced largely from unionist and loyalist sources, and they had to do with what we might loosely call the democratic deficit, the idea that Northern Ireland will have laws imposed on it, even taxes imposed on it, by people that it can't vote for. And those, I think, are much harder to deal with, at least within the protocol. I think we can safely disregard the various ideas that you resolve them by somehow allowing Northern Ireland to be politically further annexed by the EU. I think they are a very, very difficult set of problems to resolve. Now, if I were an EU negotiator, I would be super flexible about the first lot, thereby maximising the difficulties of any UK government wanting to deal with the second lot. It wouldn't really be any skin off my nose. We heard my noble friend Lord MP quote the figures of the minuscule amount of the of the EU economy accounted for by Great Britain Northern Ireland trade, 0.008%. But it seems that the Brussels negotiators don't have the same diplomatic skill that I see arrayed on the bench opposite, albeit with a little gap now, the noble Lord Kerr having absented himself. Because they, instead of showing flexibility on the practical side and digging in on sovereignty, which is what you might expect them to do, they have been difficult and obstreperous about every issue, even requiring, rabies shots for pets moving from Great Britain. It is very difficult to avoid the conclusion that they relish our discomfort and are seeking to use the protocol as a pressure point, as a way of exerting pressure on the UK in order to secure our long-term adherence to EU standards. We heard some of the figures. 20% of EU external checks are applied to the 0.5% of its trade, if you count Great Britain, Northern Ireland trade as external trade. Now, why are they doing this? I mean, it's an extraordinary thing when I listen to the debate, both in this chamber and in another chamber, and more widely in the media, and I have to say from three speakers so far, by how often the only answer that we get is, well, you signed it. I mean, seriously, that's all you've got? You signed it? I mean, how does that take us forward? All right, it's true. It was signed. It was signed as what we might call an unequal treaty. And history is littered with examples of treaties that ceased to be valid and were then abrogated or annulled. Let me give the example, it seems apt, both given the subject matter and this being the centenary year, of the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921. It was repudiated in stages by successive Irish governments, first breaking their residual constitutional links with the UK, then declaring a republic and leaving the Commonwealth. And when the final break was made, I note en passant, as we old Brussels hands say, I note that when the final break was made in 1949, the UK government was remarkably affable about it. In fact, King George sent the following message to the Irish president: "I hold in most grateful memory the services and sacrifices of the men and women of your country who rendered gallant assistance to our cause in the recent war. I pray that every blessing may be with you today and in the future." I wonder whether the European Union will be similarly accommodating if a similar repudiation happens. Somehow I doubt it. Maybe, again, that's something we can all agree on around this table. Look, when a treaty isn't working, when a treaty is a product, as this one was, of the Benn Act, of a parliament that was not working to get the best possible terms, it is obviously going to have to go in one way or another. And it seems to me that there are three options. In declining order of drama, there is outright repudiation, there is the triggering of Article 16, or there is asking for some changes within the existing structures. Now, the first is the cleanest, and as I say, there's precedent for it, but I think it is, so far, I see little appetite for it. The second, Article 16, I think there is ample justification for it already. Article 16, just to remind members of this committee and other noble lords, contains the following clause: "If the application of this protocol leads to serious economic, societal, or environmental difficulties that are liable to persist, or to diversion of trade, the Union or the United Kingdom may unilaterally take appropriate safeguarding measures." Well, let's leave aside environmental. It seems to me already that we have passed that threshold on the others. On economic disruption, well, Northern Ireland sells more to Great Britain than it does to the Republic of Ireland and the rest of the EU and the rest of the world put together. But we heard from one of our witnesses that Northern Ireland-Great Britain trade is now subject to £10 billion in extra costs. 3/4 of Northern Ireland businesses said that they had been negatively impacted. Societal difficulties, well, when, according to the opinion polls, half of opinion in Northern Ireland is against it now, it's almost exactly half and half, that's normally taken in a Northern Ireland context as a pretty good argument to desist from your course of actions and try something more consensual. And as for trade diversion, that isn't in doubt. We heard that north-south trade had increased by 50% as businesses in the province shift their sourcing and their trade. But I have to say that to portray this as a good thing, to portray the cause of extra cost and bureaucracy forcing trade diversion as somehow an economic step forward, is rather like arguing that it was a great thing that the blockade in the Second World War led to people growing more potatoes in their garden. The most basic principle of trade is that we should trust businesses to do what is rational and profitable. And if they're not able to do so because of needless paperwork, applied to repeat not in any proportionate spirit, but for the sake of making trouble, then it seems to me that that must be reckoned a net cost. And so one way or another, my lords, the current deal is going. The only question is whether it goes in agreement with our European partners or whether it goes through unilateral action. I have to say, and I know this goes against the spirit of the meeting, I have to say, my noble friend the Minister, I think, has displayed heroic restraint so far in asking nicely for changes rather than making the changes unilaterally. When we think that the European Union triggered Article 16, albeit briefly, really on no grounds beyond pique that the UK vaccine programme was ahead of its own, we have ample cause in terms of what we've already seen in terms of the economic and societal impacts. So I hope that we can do this consensually. I hope that Northern Ireland can become a bridge between the UK and the European Union. But there isn't any veto here. One way or another, the protocol has to go.
When I used to appear on referendum